Recently, a guy approached me at a Catholic young adult event and he said to me, why don't you do a video talking about things men do that women don't like? So thank you very much for the idea, you know who you were. And I crowdsourced this, I talked to a couple of women about it and just got thinking about what it is. And I'm not saying that we ought to have this scroll of like what men should and shouldn't do, because of course I'm not about that. But there's just like some general practices and just like social etiquette skills that we all should have, and hopefully this will be helpful. And of course, as always, not an exhaustive list, so do share anything that you can think of as well. But number one, I'm going to say, when a man has a lack of spatial awareness, so I find it really bizarre when I have a conversation with someone, it doesn't really matter how well I know you, and you're just really in my personal space. Like, I find that really strange. I've had people talk to me really closely before, and it's just quite odd. You know, like when you're younger and you'd go really close to someone to like whisper something in their ear. It's kind of like that, but like the whole conversation, and you're like, oh, what's happening? And I don't think people mean to do it, but it can come across creepy or a little bit intimidating or just very, very awkward. So yeah, try to maintain this kind of circle. It's called the circle of influence, right? So when you're doing a speech, you have this kind of space, and this is the space where you can move your hands and you can like be expressive and invite people into your ideas and things. It's your sphere of influence. And I like to think of it as also my personal shield. So like, you should not be within this distance of me. Like, you should, you know, maintain some space so that we can have a good free-flowing conversation, but not one where I'm kind of feeling like I'm having to like dodge you the whole time, because that feels really weird. So yes, please, men listening, have good spatial awareness, because that just helps us to feel like, okay, cool, that's very respectful, and that's a nice safe distance. Thank you. Number two, and this came up a lot actually from various women, is this lack of discipline. So there is something really attractive about someone that you can see just like is a disciplined person. So for example, I talked to a guy once and he told me that he needs various and many alarms to actually be able to get out of bed. And I think that was an immediate ick for me, because I was like, you're not a child. Like, you should be able to just be like, okay, I have to start my day now. Like, yes, you should not need 8 alarms. I just find this quite strange. And I remember thinking like, okay. And various other things like that. So for me as well, like, I do think most women do desire a man to protect them and to provide for them. And I think that translates into, you know, is this a man who's serious about his work? Is this a man who is serious about his strength or his health? Like, look, we all have different body types, different body shapes, but like, are you able to help me with DIY? Are you able to save my life? If I was crushed under like a wardrobe, could you pick it up on top of me? You know, like, and I think this whole thing about like, oh, money and looks is misconstrued, because I think what it is that women desire is this protection and this providence. So the protection aspect requires like a level of strength, and that requires a level of discipline, because, you know, you need to obviously work your muscles in order to become strong. So that is very attractive, and it's very unattractive, I think, when you see this lack of discipline. And obviously with the providence, like, that's seeing someone who has a vision for their work, for their goals. They know where they're going, you know, they have a plan. And I have to admit, I'm definitely not the best one at this. Like, strategic thinking is something I like to think I'm really good at, but ultimately I just do things that I enjoy doing, and I don't necessarily know like what the end goal is. And that can be a really bad way to start anything, because you need to have the vision. So I think that a man without vision can be a little bit disarming, just because it makes you feel like, oh, like, you know, and of course, we don't know. God only knows like what he has planned for our lives, and he could, you know, 360 us at any moment, throw us into a tailspin, change our lives completely. But it is good for us to have like some direction. And I think especially men over the age of 30, when they're just a bit aimless, that I do find that unattractive, and I do find that kind of icky. And a lot of the women I spoke to said similar things. So lack of discipline. Number 3 goes back to like social etiquette and just having manners. And whatever your opinion is about chivalry or, you know, how men should act in this time and this place, I do think that, you know, good manners go a really long way. So, you know, if I go somewhere and I don't know, there's like a pizza box being thrown into the group, right? And all the men just like run in and grab the pizza, and then there's like no pizza for the women because the women didn't go into the scramble, like it was like a rugby kind of like huddle. You know, that just is like, oh, okay, he didn't even think about me. Like he didn't even think about anyone else but himself. Or, you know, when you see a woman struggling with heavy bags and you don't ask if she needs help, you see a mother with a pram and you don't offer to carry the pram up the stairs for her, or you don't open a door, you know, you like close a door in someone's face because you didn't think to hold it open. So I do think a lack of manners is also a bit icky because it almost shows this lack of awareness of other people, and it's very much just like you're very self-centered. And this isn't to say, because I have been in situations where I've been driving and I've like not let someone through, or I've cut someone up, and it's only after the fact that I'm like, oh no, why did I do that? I should have let them cross or whatever. So I know that sometimes this happens because you're absent-minded, you're in your own thoughts, but in general, I think it's really nice when men can lean into that chivalrous nature and just show good manners, because it shows generosity, it shows awareness of other people, and it shows this kindness, which is very manly, because it's very like nurturing in like a fatherly way, protective way. And, you know, bonus points if you walk on the outside. I know this is probably like a Victorian practice, but hey, if a horse and carriage or a car is about to like run into the road, I would like my man to be willing to die first. That's quite dark, isn't it? But, you know, there you go. That's life. Number 4 is if the guy is too smooth or too charming. And I know this is probably going to sound really like, because I have complained in the past about men being too passive. And that's because I have so many beautiful, amazing single female friends and pretty eligible male single friends too. And I'm like, why are you guys like, why are we just not getting together? And so I don't want this to sound like I'm being a hypocrite, but I do think that a guy who's like too charming, it's really off-putting. I had a man once say to me recently, actually, he was like, oh, what do you do? And I was like, oh, I'm a writer. And he was like, oh, I'd read anything you wrote. And I was like, whoa, you've just met me. I could be a terrible, terrible, terrible writer. And what that did for me is it kind of was like, oh, because the guy was pretty good looking as well. And at first I was like, oh, he's quite handsome. Then he said that and I was like, oh, because it just felt very construed and it felt like it was a pickup line. And I was like, you don't know anything about me. And I think that's what I replied to him, because, you know, if someone were to respond to that, like, oh, I'd love to read something you wrote, and I send something and it's like, wow, you're a really good writer, I'd be like, thank you so much. But until you've actually read anything I've written, you can't make that judgment, and that compliment is completely empty. So yeah, that kind of like too charming, like uber smooth, it can just come across disingenuous. So I think like it's definitely good to be intentional and to be like, hey, like, you know, I saw you across the room, you look like an interesting person. Love that. I love that. Like that proactiveness, great. Introduce yourself, be intentional, but don't be disingenuous. Don't kind of use the lines unless it's in a jokey way. Like if you want to do a really funny, cheesy Christian dating pickup line on me, fine. If you're going to make it a joke, that's fine. But don't do things like being all like, oh, I don't know. I just find it really cool. So yes, that would be my next one, is don't be too charming. Don't be disingenuous. And then I've talked about this one before, but like to up your attractiveness, it's really good to improve your conversational skills. And in that, I mean, stop having monologues. Have a dialogue, because I have had conversations with guys who just talk, and I'm a great question asker, which can be both a blessing and a curse, because it can be a blessing because I can keep the conversation going for ages and ages and ages, and then realize like hours in, wow, they know nothing about me. So yeah, like just someone who doesn't seem interested in actually listening to you, someone who's just going to talk at you. No, that's not very nice. That's not very cool. And I guess the term is like mansplaining as well. Because it's this whole thing of like, let me just tell you, I'm going to tell you this story and there's going to be no interaction. I'm just going to explain it, or I'm just going to share it. And so I think, you know, having that conversation is definitely good, because it is a turn off. When it's just a monologue, it's so like, okay, when's he gonna stop? And does he even care I'm here? Like, am I just a faceless listener? Am I just a giant pair of ears to him, you know? And then my last point is hypocrisy. So I find this really painful, especially within the Christian dating world, because obviously, like, we have been given this gift of faith, and you know, I'm a Catholic, so like we have so much, like, from the saints, obviously leaning onto scripture, like so many devotionals to really pour ourselves into, to understand every single subject we could ever want from various different personalities, because the communion of saints are just amazing, and there's someone for everyone. There's the heavenly friend for all of our needs and our problems and our worries, and yet we still fall. And I know that we're humans, so that's going to happen, but I think hypocrisy I find really hard. So there was one particular scenario that a friend of mine was recalling, and I was like, oh, okay, I've seen this, and this definitely is an ick, where you have like the whole like do what I say, not what I do type of attitude. I remember there was like one guy, and he's very much on that like traditional part, you know, talking about modesty and traditional roles and everything like that. But then on his Instagram, he would follow and also share very, very immodest photos of women, or he'd hang around with women who were dressed very, very immodestly, and he'd like share photos together. Of course, this man cannot control what his female friends are going to wear. I'm not saying that, but he would like share these photos, even though in his daily life, he'd be very much like, oh, modesty and all this kind of stuff. And that's really off-putting, because it's like, either you care about this virtue and you want to practice what you preach, or you don't, and it's just like something you say to make yourself look good. And I find that tricky. And recently as well, I heard of this story which made me so sad, because it was this guy who has quite conservative values, and for me, I was like, oh, such a good role model, and just like kind of like a family man. You could imagine he'd be a really good family man. But then it was like, some of the things he was saying was just not very chaste, and not very, you know, man of God-ish. I don't know if that is a word, man of God-ish, but you know, just like, so for me, hypocrisy I find difficult. I think we all need to be humble in the fact that we as humans are fallen, we are attracted to concupiscence, which is sin. So, you know, it's not like we are always going to be perfect. We're never going to be perfect, in fact. But I think the person who tries to ride too high on that horse, and in such an obvious way, like shows another side of himself, is like, oh no. Because as women, we're looking to you men to be like steadfast and to be the rock. And I know that, of course, you're going to have your own struggles, and you know, that's why as Catholics we have confession, and what a beautiful sacrament it is to be able to get, you know, gain God's mercy and his redemption. But I think that we really do need to be better at practicing what we preach, and in practicing what we hear preached to us, especially if we're having sound preaching, of course. So yes, hypocrisy is going to be my last one. I don't know if this certain individual wanted me to do more kind of like, oh, it's when men eat with their mouth open type of things, but I think just general good manners encapsulates all of that. And yeah, I'd love to hear what you other women think, if there's anything else that I've missed out that's like, yeah, that is really frustrating when men do that. But this is not to hate on men. We love men, we love women. And yeah, I hope this has been helpful. Anyway, speak to you soon. God bless.